answers to the question of whether we are, how different it is in Argentina, in Italy and South Africa, and how we're responding to it. And hopefully it will help you, the audience, to also see how and why we are different, or to realize that after all, we are not that different. Today's program will be as follows. I will first give a short introduction to our three presenters in order in which they will speak. Each presenter will have 20 minutes for us to remain within our 75-minute time limit we have set for the meeting. If you have any questions you would like to put to the presenters, or if you wish to comment on their presentations, please do so in the chat function. We will try our best to respond to this if time allows. Before we proceed, just a reminder that we are privileged again to have Ms. Silvia Barbuzzo with us, who will offer simultaneous translation from English to Spanish and vice versa. And to follow the translated version, please just ensure that you click on the English or Spanish version tabs at the bottom of your Zoom page. Right, so our first presenter will be Professor Daniele Garrone, who is a biblical scholar and a Valdensian pastor. Since 1988, Daniele has been professor of Old Testament at the Valdensian Faculty of Theology, of which he was also the dean from 2003 to 2015. He was part of the interconfessional group of translators of the Old Testament into current language, the TILC, from 1967 to 1984, and he was also the president of the Biblical Society in Italy until 2012. Since October 2021, Daniele has been president of the Federation of Evangelical Churches in Italy. Unfortunately, Daniele will have to leave the meeting a bit earlier because he has a prior commitment, but we also welcome Ms. Hannah Kumar, a colleague of his from the Federation of Evangelical Churches in Italy, should there be any questions regarding his presentation. Our second presenter will be Gabriela Lugor. Gabriela holds a degree in social work from the University of Buenos Aires, where she also studied social policy. She began her academic career at the National University of Lanús, where she was an assistant professor of social work until 2023. She was also a professor of asylum and human rights, specializing in migration and asylum. Since 2004, Gabriela has been teaching at the social work profession at the University of Buenos Aires, both on pre-professional practices and in an elective on migration and human rights. She participated and still participates in academic research related to migration and is a guest lecturer in several postgraduate courses, such as the Diploma in Migration and Asylum offered by the University of Buenos Aires' Faculty of Law. Finally, Gabriela has also been a member of the Argentine Commission for Refugees and Migrants, CAREF, since 1995, where she started in the Social Service Department, and currently she serves as CAREF's director, leading its 5 offices. Her duties include consultations with refugees and migrants, the development of regional training programs, and national and international advocacy. Our final presenter is my colleague, Professor Xolile Simon, and you must please excuse if the two of us have a faint glow to us. This is what happens when in South Africa, when the Springboks win the Rugby World Cup. Anyway, so Xolile is a professor of physiology at Stellenbosch University. He holds under and postgraduate degrees from the University of the Western Cape. PhD in physiology was on cultural and religious encounters between hosts and strangers in communities of faith and other communities. As an ordained minister in the Uniting Reformed Church in Southern Africa, Xolile participates and does research related to this theme, such as ministries of reconciliation and justice in context of cultural and religious, that's African independent Christian and Islam diversity in Africa. Both academic and professional research inform the contents and hermeneutical and methodological approaches to the theology of missions and religions. also as a field of specialization and supervision for Crolile in missiology and sociology of religion. Currently, Crolile is researching transformative, that is formative and developmental encounters through direct and indirect interfaith social justice engagements of students and citizens in academic and co-curricula of institutions of higher education. Hence, the theme of this curriculum is for him very important, but it's also relevant in the so-called border crossing of students and citizens and migrants in the different public spaces, including communities of faith. So, colleagues, there you have our presenters. Let me just see.
Sí, se debe haber cortado la transmisión. Propongo entonces, invito a que el profesor Daniele Garone inicie su ponencia, por favor.
Ahora sí. Yes. Yes or no? It works. Yes, in fact, I have another lecture, but since we started 1 hour before planned, I can stay longer than I thought. So I can leave at least, I can stay here with you at least 1 hour. So not only give my speech, but also listen to the others, and that's much more important to me. Before I try to give some information and indication on our involvement with migrants here in Italy, I want to say something about the background. In Italy, but also in many other European countries, there is today a tendency to consider the recent migratory flows towards Europe as an emergency. And this emergency is then interpreted by some as an invasion. This is most of the political propaganda we listen to. We are being invaded. And some other present this invasion as a threat to the identity or even the ethnic integrity of the nation. And someone even dare to say that this is a threat against the Christian identity of our people. The migratory flows are actually the manifestation close to us of an epochal trend, the impact of which we can already foresee in the coming decades. You know, the causes are, for example, the desertification of vast territories in Africa, climate change, war, and we know what happened in Syria or Ukraine, but also the systematic and violent denial of human rights by autocratic and or theocratic regimes, for instance, Afghanistan. We are convinced as Protestant churches in Italy that a migration policy that is both human rights inspired and realistic cannot and must not limit itself to reasoning in terms of emergencies. But we must have ideas on how to avoid masses of men, women, and children having to leave the places where they would instead like to remain in freedom and live in peace. Only a recent example in Italy, faced with the constant death of those crossing the Mediterranean Sea in the dangerous boats of the traffickers, our Minister of the Interior said they should not have left. as these poor people were like people venturing onto a glacier without the proper equipment. And we said several times in public, the problem is instead a different one. They should not have had to leave. That's the problem. Why people have to leave. So we think that migration is the epochal challenge facing the constitutional democracies of the world. And therefore, the background of what churches do, our diaconical involvement, and say advocacy and public theology are one of the most complex issues of world order in the coming decades. Now, only some sketches about our action. As you perhaps know, on October the 3rd, 2013, 368 people died in a shipwreck off the coast of Lampedusa, the small Italian isle that is closer to Tunisia than to Sicily, and has become Europe's first port of call. 68 people whose corpse would be recovered, and a lot of other people disappeared. We then decided, after that shipwreck, to have a migration observatory on the island. At the beginning, our people there made a very important work of advocacy and information. Above all, collecting and disseminating the stories of these migrant people. Most of them, before embarking, had been staying months and sometimes years in horrible camps in Libya. Most of them have been tortured and abused. Today, on the island, we welcome people arriving, landing with drinks, blankets, and so forth, and words of welcome. Imagine that this is the first and only sympathetic contact for migrants before going to police control. Second point, together with the Roman Catholic community of Sant'Egidio, you know perhaps something about Sant'Egidio, they are all over the world, we have proposed to our government to organize what we call humanitarian corridors. We have found some paragraphs in a number of European and Italian laws that provide for the granting of entry visas for humanitarian reasons. And so we started to organize safe and legal travel for fragile people. These people, they receive visas in the country from which they depart. For example, in Lebanon, we have people there, and these are mainly refugees from Syria. In Libya, people are leaving the detention camps in Libya. From Pakistan and Iran, we have humanitarian corridors for those who have fled the Taliban in Afghanistan. Other organizations in Italy, but also in Europe, have followed our example. For instance, the Roman Catholic Caritas, a trade union. So since 2016, altogether, we could have more than 6,000 refugees coming safe and legal to our country. 1,539 are the people we are taking care of as Federation of the Protestant Churches. It is essential for us to underline two aspects. After welcoming these people, after the reception, it's necessary to integrate those who have arrived for their dignity, first of all, but also because a democracy, as we want to be, does not need marginalized people, but citizens, active citizens with rights and duties. In most European countries, these arrivals can be met with the need for workers, from industry to welfare. In Italy, we are missing medical doctors, nurses. The marginalization and criminalization of migrants is a defeat of the values that underpin our democracies. This is part of our public theology, to stress this. And instead, the present government is keeping people in the marginalization. Those who arrive in Lampedusa stay in Italy without any perspective, and our public advocacy goes in another direction. We say we should integrate these people, not because we want to make charity toward them, but because we want to be a democracy that needs citizens and not marginalized people. Second, if we have been able, as small churches and small organizations, to receive and integrate thousands of people, let us imagine what European states could do. For instance, by investing the millions of euros they use for refoulement operation here. To speak of refoulement is only propaganda. They say we will send away all illegal immigrants, but it's impossible, and people stay here nevertheless, but as marginalized people. We try to emphasize that humanitarian corridors are not the charity of pious souls, but a best practice for policy. Third, very short, there is also a home front, and here I have to correct a mistake, an intercultural mistake I made in the written version of this speak. I wrote black labor. In Italy, black labor is the same as labor under the table, illegal, irregular work. So we have also a home front. Thousands of irregular, so-called illegal immigrants are exploited, particularly as farm laborers. And there is a need of illegal workers in that area because their labor under the table is necessary to keep prices low to serve the interests of multinational corporations. In one of the areas of this exploitation, in Calabria, in southern Italy, we have begun to offer decent housing as an alternative to the horrible camps in which the workers are forced to live, and also vocational training opportunities. And we hope to spread this activity also as well in other regions of our country. We try also to develop some advocacy in our public interventions. We try to counter fake news and hate speech. All of them are spreading and growing in Italy. In Italy, most of the rescues at sea of migrants who come with the dangerous transfer of traffickers are carried out, are saved by government forces, by our Navy, for instance, and only 10% by non-governmental organization, the so-called NGO. Every day, propaganda is going against the NGO, although they only make a very small part of the job, and the job is carried on by our Navy. But they are accused to be the only pull factor of illegal clandestine immigration. In our political life, which increasingly increasingly seems to be a perennial election campaign, xenophobia is growing. It is a spiral. Fears and prejudice are taken up and amplified by propaganda in a movement of slogans that ignore data and facts. Here too, we believe it is our task and our duty as churches to intervene with information and culture. Integration, we stress that integration is a good investment. Marginalization and criminalization of migrants are a defeat of the values that underpin our democracy. I have already told them. Last point, migrations doesn't only affect our churches as a social problem in which we are. Migration also affects our churches. The number of Protestant and evangelicals has grown a lot in Italy, not as a result of our evangelism, but as a result of migrations. Presbyterian and Methodists from Korea and Philippines and from various countries in Africa, for example, Baptists and Pentecostals from various countries in Latin America, to mention just a few cases. So-called ethnic communities have formed where the language of origin and national culture are maintained. Sometimes these communities have asked for and obtained hospitality in the premises of historic evangelical churches. But some 20 years ago, we will have, in a few weeks, a huge meeting here in Rome to reflect on these 20 years. We developed a program called Being Church Together. That is, we propose to travel together between all the Italian Protestants and those who have recently arrived from other countries and other cultures. We propose to travel together a road opposite to that of assimilation, because the other two alternatives are separation. We host you in our premises, we help you, but you do your job and we do our job, or assimilation. You're welcome if you behave, as Oswald mentioned, always very serious, almost sad, without drums, without guitars, without anything. We tried another way. That is, we do not want to conform the spiritual identity, the liturgies, and forms of worship of the immigrants to the traditional models of the Italian churches. On the contrary, we are committed to building and living together the one church in Christ. We must learn together to overcome the barriers of language, culture, and different traditions. The process is going on, and we will evaluate these 20 years in a few weeks, as I told. Our experience shows that there are also hot spots. For instance, we have to discuss, to deal with the approach to the scriptures. Liberalism, historical critical reading on one side, and a more literal reading of the Bible on the other. The roles in the family and some ethical issues are also a problem, such as homosexuality. The vision of leadership and the role of disciplines. We have different perspectives at the beginning of our common road. The relationship with the pluralist and secular society as well is a topic in our discussions. The tool for growing together is that of common reflection and training to workshops and stages organized with a specific methodology. This has so far enabled us to overcome even a moment of crisis. A few years ago, the question of the recognition of homosexual couples and union was one of these moments of crisis. I have already said this. Yes, and I think I exhausted my time. I hope you could understand something in my mixture of Piedmont dialect and English, but in any case, you have the notes. You only have to change black label with label under the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniele. And I apologize for not handing over to you there. My line dropped for a moment, but when I joined you again, I was happy to see that you did proceed. We also know that you need to leave us soon, so thank you very, very much for sharing that information with us. Right, colleagues, now we move on to our second presentation, and we move to South America. And it's over to you, Gabriela. We listen to you.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Buenas tardes, buenos días, depende de dónde estén. Es un gusto estar acá con ustedes. Quiero agradecer mucho la invitación de la red para poder sumarnos, en particular a Daniel Veros, por el acercamiento. Y bueno, también es un gusto poder compartir con ustedes que aquí acaba de hacer Daniel en torno a cómo se interpreta la migración hoy en día a nivel global, ¿no? Muchas de las cuestiones que él acaba de plantear son muy familiares para quienes estamos de este lado del mundo también. Esta lógica de criminalización de las personas migrantes, la perspectiva de invasión de quienes migran, la resistencia de los estados a recibir a quienes llegan, el cierre de fronteras, la exposición de esas personas a situaciones de extrema vulnerabilidad, justamente por la forma en que los estados en este último tiempo, ya desde hace algunas décadas, vienen tratando el tema de la migración, restringiendo cada vez más todo lo que hace a el acceso al territorio, a la documentación y a derechos sociales. Así que, bueno, en este contexto voy a compartir un PowerPoint. Ustedes me dirán si se ve bien. ¿Sí? Bien.
Perfect, thank you.
Bueno, entonces, CAREF es la Comisión Argentina para Personas Refugiadas y Migrantes. Vamos a ver si esto quiere... Ahí va. Es una asociación civil hoy en día de carácter ecuménico que desde el año 1973 trabaja por los derechos de las personas migrantes, refugiadas y solicitantes de asilo en Argentina. También, digamos, puedo agregar aquí que desde hace ya más de una década, con cada vez más fuerza, CAREF viene trabajando a nivel regional y global en todo lo que tiene que ver con incidencia en términos de derechos de las personas migrantes, no solamente en Argentina, sino en el mundo. CAREF se crea en 1973 es creada en 1973 por un grupo de iglesias protestantes históricas de Argentina, que son aquellas que conformaron esa comisión, que hoy en día sigue en pie como organismo ecuménico y está conformada por las iglesias que ustedes ven allí en el slide, que son la Iglesia Evangélica Metodista Argentina, la Iglesia Evangélica del Río de la Plata, la Iglesia Evangélica Discípulos de Cristo, la Iglesia Evangélica Valdense y la Iglesia Evangélica Luterana Unida. En lo que hace a su tarea diacónica, CAREF tiene un programa social conformado que está compuesto por las áreas que ustedes pueden observar allí. Verán que en el centro de ese círculo está el área de atención directa a personas migrantes solicitantes de asilo y refugiados. Y a partir de allí convergen, ¿no? y confluyen una serie de áreas que van desde la promoción, capacitación y fortalecimiento institucional, el área de comunicación, investigación y difusión, incidencia pública, y también el archivo institucional y todo lo que hace a la memoria histórica de la institución. ¿Por qué el área de atención directa está en el centro? Porque desde sus inicios, CAREF ha consolidado su forma de comprender a la migración desde lo que surge de la atención y de la voz directa de las personas migrantes. La atención directa es la columna vertebral de la institución. La experiencia y la palabra de las personas con las que trabajamos son aquella fuente de la que aprendemos, abrevamos y podemos construir una agenda interna que nos permite trabajar en todos los otros frentes. Y a la vez es parte del desafío cotidiano e institucional que todas estas áreas estén trabajando de manera consistente y coherente en aquellas cuestiones que entendemos son centrales para promover la ampliación de derechos de la población con la que trabajamos. Bien, a ver si esto me permite continuar. Ahí va. Hoy en día CAREF tiene una sede central, que es esta que ustedes observan aquí en la Ciudad Autónoma de Buenos Aires, que es nuestra sede histórica, en el barrio de Flores, muy cercano de donde funcionaba el ICEDET, que era el Instituto de Formación Teológica, hasta hace un tiempo. Y digo, es una zona muy fuerte en términos de la presencia de las iglesias protestantes en la ciudad de Buenos Aires, y a la vez es una zona que está muy cercana a barrios donde hay una presencia de migración de personas migrantes regionales también muy importante, ¿no? Ahí funciona nuestra sede central en una casa que supo ser en la década de los 70 una casa de recepción y asistencia de familias refugiadas en aquel entonces, y que hoy es bueno, la sede central de la institución. Y desde el año 2019, y en el marco de un proyecto común con el ACNUR, la Agencia de las Naciones Unidas para los Refugiados, CAREF pudo llegar a diferentes lugares del país, asentando oficinas donde ustedes ahí ven estos puntos. Por un lado, en la provincia de Misiones, una provincia fronteriza con Paraguay y con Brasil, con una oficina que está justo en el punto fronterizo de la Triple Frontera, en Puerto Iguazú, y también en la ciudad capital de Misiones, que es en Posadas. Por otro lado, en la provincia de Jujuy, una zona fronteriza con Bolivia, tanto en la ciudad fronteriza de La Quiaca como en la ciudad capital de San Salvador de Jujuy, y finalmente en Mendoza, en la ciudad de Mendoza. Tanto en La Quiaca como, en San Salvador de Jujuy como en Mendoza, trabajamos de manera articulada con organizaciones locales, compartimos oficina con esas organizaciones locales, porque entendemos que esta presencia de CAREF en las diferentes provincias es una presencia que tiene que tener la posibilidad no solamente de asistir a quienes llegan, tanto por el corredor, ¿no?, de Brasil en este lugar, o el corredor norte andino en Jujuy, sino también fortalecer a las organizaciones locales para que, si CAREF por alguna razón tiene que volver a centrarse en Buenos Aires y no tiene la capacidad de seguir trabajando en esos lugares por cuestiones vinculadas a proyectos, recursos, lo que fuere, dejar asentada una capacidad local para que esas organizaciones locales puedan dar continuidad a la tarea es parte de lo que entendemos es estratégicamente importante frente a esta oportunidad que hoy tenemos de tener presencia en diferentes lugares del país. Volviendo a cómo está conformado el trabajo que llevamos adelante, les decía que la tarea de atención directa a la población migrante es central y que a partir de allí se constituyen las agendas de las otras áreas. En el área de atención directa hay dos servicios. Por un lado, el servicio social, donde hay un equipo de trabajadoras sociales, psicólogas y abogadas que brindan servicios profesionales especializados a todas las personas que consultan. Y por otro lado, una clínica sociojurídica que llevamos adelante con otra organización de derechos humanos, que es el CELS, el Centro de Estudios Legales y Sociales, y la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. La clínica jurídica tiene la particularidad de ser un práctico curricular de la Universidad de Derecho, donde los estudiantes del último año de la carrera se especializan en los temas vinculados a migración y asilo en CAREF, justamente. Y lo hacen a través de la atención de la población y la formación que brindan profesionales de nuestra institución. Aquí les comparto cómo viene siendo la atención durante este año 2023, donde observamos un número de atención, perdón, 2022, ahí hay un error de tipeo, donde observamos que 3.213 situaciones de personas migrantes se atendieron, representando a 56 nacionalidades. Esto es una característica que CAREF tiene, y es que a lo largo de su historia ha tenido la capacidad de abrir las puertas a las personas que llegan de diferentes lugares del mundo. Por cómo es la dinámica migratoria hacia Argentina, por supuesto que ustedes verán que en este cuadro que la mayoría de esa población proviene de la región, porque América Latina es una región donde la mayoría de la movilidad humana existente hoy por hoy es intrarregional, ¿no? Si uno pregunta quiénes son los migrantes en América Latina, podría decir fundamentalmente latinoamericanos y caribeños. Aquí hay una particularidad que también tiene que ver con la coyuntura de estos últimos años. Ustedes podrán observar que la mayor parte de la población asistida proviene de Venezuela, ¿sí? Y luego le siguen otras nacionalidades como Bolivia, Perú, Colombia, Paraguay. Y en este último tiempo, Siria y Rusia en particular, en este último tiempo es uno de las nacionalidades que se ha ido incrementando, en particular luego de la guerra. Esa diversidad de nacionalidades y de atención, aunque fundamentalmente concentrada en nacionalidades latinoamericanas, es atendida en las diferentes sedes, en esta dispersión que ustedes ven aquí, donde Buenos Aires sigue siendo el espacio donde se atiende la mayor cantidad de personas, pero La Quiaca como lugar de recepción fronterizo es un lugar muy importante de llegada de la población que se atiende, fundamentalmente la población venezolana que va llegando por el corredor andino, y muchas veces luego de haber buscado residir en países de la región con antelación donde no han podido prosperar y deciden tener una segunda migración. Otra de las características que vemos durante este último tiempo es que Argentina se está convirtiendo en un país de tránsito hacia Uruguay, ¿no? La situación social y económica de Argentina en este último tiempo, ustedes no sé cuántos sabrán, es bastante compleja, y esto ha hecho que parte de la migración que antes llegaba con el objetivo de residir en Argentina, ahora lo haga pensando en un tránsito hacia Uruguay. La población que llega por La Quiaca es una población que nosotros llamamos de caminantes, lo mismo que aquellas que llegan por Puerto Iguazú, ¿no? Pero fundamentalmente por La Quiaca, lo que venimos viendo desde hace ya unos años es que estamos hablando de migración de familias enteras, que van llegando por tierra, haciendo tramos con muchísima dificultad. Desde la pandemia cada vez con más obstáculos para poder cruzar de manera regular las fronteras, por lo tanto esos tránsitos se vuelven cada vez más complejos, más riesgosos, más intrincados, y las personas llegan en condiciones de mucho desgaste físico, emocional, por lo tanto desde el primer momento requieren multiplicidad de atenciones, ¿no? En este abordaje donde la cuestión legal es una, pero también la posibilidad de escucha, un lugar donde poder alojarse, donde poder descansar, donde poder asearse, la atención de su salud, poder llegar a destino de una manera segura, poder conectar con organizaciones que puedan brindar información confiable y no caer en manos de quienes engañan a costa de, además, quedarse con el dinero de las personas. Bueno, toda una serie de cuestiones que son muy, muy, muy importantes a la hora de la recepción de las personas que van llegando. Y por último, aquí ven cuáles son los motivos de consulta, donde la cuestión de la radicación es la mayor, digamos, consulta que recibimos, la mayor cantidad de consultas tienen que ver con el acceso a la documentación. Una de las cuestiones que como organización y junto con otras organizaciones de la región venimos planteando es que la documentación debe ser entendida hoy en día como un derecho de las personas migrantes, no solo como una prerrogativa de los estados, ¿no? Porque la documentación es aquello que luego permite muchas veces poder acceder a otros derechos esenciales como la salud o la educación. Bien. Aquí, bueno, los motivos de consulta en lo que hace a la clínica jurídica, que como verán, la cantidad de consultas que van por el área específicamente jurídica son bastante menos, y por lo general tienen que ver con cuestiones que se vinculan con el acceso a derechos, a diferentes programas sociales que atienden a personas en condición de pobreza y a los cuales las personas migrantes no logran acceder por diferentes razones, entre ellas por cuestiones que tienen que ver con la documentación, con conminaciones a hacer abandono de territorio, es decir, a, digamos, estar expuestos a una expulsión, y diferentes otros aspectos que requieren gestiones que tienen que ver tanto con lo administrativo como muchas veces con lo judicial, ¿no? Iniciar causas a nivel judicial para garantizar derechos de la población que atendemos. Bien, todo lo que tiene que ver con el área de promoción, capacitación y fortalecimiento institucional tiene como objetivo contribuir a la construcción y consolidación de prácticas sociales integradoras de las distintas comunidades de migrantes, a través de los diferentes actores sociales que son relevantes en el territorio, en las comunidades, tanto aquellos que tienen que ver con el Estado como con las propias comunidades migrantes y refugiadas. ¿Qué es lo que buscamos a través del área de promoción y capacitación? Buscamos sensibilizar, buscamos formar en derechos de las personas migrantes y refugiadas, tanto a las propias comunidades migrantes como a los funcionarios estatales que tienen como función justamente y competencia garantizar esos derechos, y también trabajar con la comunidad local a fin de revertir esa mirada criminalizadora y negativa de la migración, ¿no? Que nos parece esencial para que los procesos de inclusión puedan darse respetando las diferencias, respetando la diversidad y a la vez considerando a estas personas iguales ante todo lo que tiene que ver con derechos. El área de investigación y difusión tiene la idea, la misión de elaborar y difundir informes que están centrados en muchas veces en estos temas de agenda, no muchas veces, no siempre, en estos temas de agenda que nosotros vamos definiendo a partir de la atención, con la idea de generar evidencia que permita justamente también desnaturalizar mitos, prejuicios, y generar evidencia que a la vez pueda impactar en políticas públicas para poder ampliar cuestiones vinculadas a derechos de las personas migrantes. Es decir, el área de investigación y difusión, con estos informes e investigaciones que genera, también nos brinda herramientas para poder trabajar en términos de incidencia pública, ¿no? Porque esta evidencia es evidencia que a nosotros nos interesa poder llevar al propio Estado a la hora de discutir políticas públicas en términos de ampliación de derechos. Por eso ustedes podrán ver, ahí están como las tapas de diferentes publicaciones de este último tiempo, que hay cuestiones que discuten el acceso al DNI, que es la documentación aquí en la Argentina, el tema de las fronteras, el tema del trabajo, también las cuestiones vinculadas a la detención de las personas migrantes. El área de comunicación lleva adelante diferentes objetivos. Por un lado, posicionar a CAREF como una organización referente en temas migratorios y justamente como una organización ecuménica que es capaz de brindar información consistente y confiable a los medios de comunicación en estos temas, que no es una cuestión menor. Justamente a partir de esto, incidir en la opinión pública. Esto es otra de las cuestiones que es muy importante para CAREF, ¿no? Llegar a los medios para poder, a través de ellos, también aportar a desnaturalizar esta mirada negativa de la migración de la que nos hablaba Daniel. Por otro lado, producir contenidos comunicacionales que visibilicen y promuevan los derechos de las personas migrantes, refugiadas y solicitantes de asilo. Las personas migrantes y las personas refugiadas son personas con derechos por el simple hecho de ser personas, en primer lugar, ¿no? Si nos paramos desde la lógica de derechos humanos, pero además, en el caso de Argentina, hay un marco normativo que garantiza una serie de derechos muy importantes, y que muy pocas veces se difunden a la comunidad en general y a los propios funcionarios públicos. Entonces, para nosotros el área de comunicación es un área que tiene que permitirnos llegar a más población para difundir estos derechos y, bueno, por otro lado, tener una clara impronta institucional. Sobre el archivo institucional y memoria, yo quiero comentarles, bueno, que en estos años, CAREF este año cumple 50 años de trabajo. Y fue creada en un momento muy delicado de América Latina, cuando las dictaduras en la región asolaban a la mayoría de los países, y a los pocos años de haberse creado CAREF, la dictadura llega a instalarse también en Argentina, y aún en ese marco, CAREF sigue trabajando durante todo ese periodo de dictaduras en toda la región, en la atención de las personas que se exiliaban porque su vida corría riesgo y llegaban al país. Ese trabajo fue un trabajo que implicó un riesgo muy importante para quienes lo llevaron adelante en ese momento. Y estamos hoy en día recuperando la memoria histórica de esa tarea gracias al apoyo de la Iglesia valdense. Y este año hemos logrado generar una muestra que está siendo expuesta en el Archivo Nacional de la Memoria, donde se visibiliza la tarea de las iglesias durante todo ese periodo de las dictaduras en la región a través de la tarea de CAREF, recibiendo a quienes por la persecución política tenían que salir de sus países. Así que bueno, para nosotros es muy importante el área y la recuperación de la memoria histórica de CAREF a 40 años de democracia ininterrumpida en Argentina también, ¿no? Aquí el área de incidencia pública, que justamente, bueno, aquí les puedo compartir algunas de las cuestiones centrales que tienen que ver con, bueno, cuáles son los temas sobre los cuales estamos trabajando, tanto en el marco de Naciones Unidas, como en el marco de la OEA y también en nuestro propio país, ¿no? Partiendo de la incidencia en nuestro propio país. Les hablé ya de la regularización migratoria como un aspecto que consideramos esencial. También el tema de niñez migrante es un tema sobre el cual hemos empezado a trabajar con mucho ahínco en este último tiempo. Todo lo que hace a los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales, el acceso de la población a estos derechos, el ingreso regular a territorio, quiere decir que las fronteras sean un espacio que garantice el ingreso en un espacio de expulsión, y las cuestiones de género. Bien, aquí ya para finalizar y quizás para concluir con algunas de las cosas ya dichas, pero enfatizándolas. O sea, estamos en un contexto en el que la migración es un tema que cada vez reviste, digamos, más seriedad por la complejidad y por la envergadura en términos de cantidad de personas que se están viendo obligadas a migrar, ¿no? Según los datos de la Organización Internacional para las Migraciones, hoy el 3,6% de la población a nivel global vive fuera de su país de origen. Y si miramos qué pasaba en el 2000 era el 2,8%. ¿Y qué pasaba en 1980? Eran el 2,3%. Por ende, estamos en un contexto global donde la migración va incrementándose por diversas razones. A la vez, los estados cada vez restringen más las posibilidades de ingreso, de recepción, de documentación y de inclusión. Por ende, ¿no? Es muy importante construir agendas institucionales que puedan, desde el lugar de las iglesias y desde las organizaciones que abrazamos los derechos humanos, impulsar otras formas de entender a la migración, otras formas de centrarnos en el tema poniendo el foco en la persona humana, y a partir de ahí generar acciones mancomunadas. Creo que es muy importante, son muy importantes los espacios como este para poder generar acciones comunes y entender que desde los diferentes lugares del mundo estamos teniendo una mirada similar desde las iglesias en relación a la migración, y que esto amerita poder pensar en cómo fortalecer esas agendas comunes de recepción, de asistencia, de incidencia pública. Bien, aquí algunas cosas que surgen de la atención en sí de CAREF, ¿no? Cómo la agenda institucional se construye a partir de la intervención directa, ¿no? Darle lugar especial a la voz de los propios migrantes. Cómo las acciones de incidencia tienden a ampliar los márgenes para el acceso a programas y a la regularización migratoria. Y cómo vincular, ¿no? Desde lo que es la atención directa y otros espacios, todo lo que hace a la integración sociolaboral, los desafíos que tiene la inclusión social. Y finalmente, bueno, poder llegar a entender que hay una serie de cuestiones que obturan la inclusión en términos amplios y duraderos, que son los mecanismos de regulación social que conocemos, tales como el racismo, el fundamentalismo cultural, las restricciones de ciudadanía, que impactan en la población migrante de una manera diferencial y que por lo tanto ameritan bueno, una intervención amplia, integral, sostenida en el tiempo y mancomunada para poder dar respuesta tanto a las personas que migran como impulsar a los estados para que también puedan dar respuesta a esas personas. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, colleague Gabriela, for that view from the ground roots level, and for giving us a glimpse into the work that has been done on grassroots level, also in South America with migrants. Our final presenter is my colleague, Paulile Simon, who is joining us from Stellenbosch. So, Paulile, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, Len, I just want to make sure you can see the screen.
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Let me just move this. Okay, colleagues, good afternoon. I'll try as much as possible just to stay within the 20 minutes. As you can see, my kind of explorative title there, where I'm interested in religion, what it means for people, but probably also the plural in terms of religions, because the context in which the churches are responding would be African indigenous spirituality or religions, Islam and Christianity. Those would be the three religions, and that's why that's in the title. And secondly, as far as migration is concerned, it moves beyond the paradigm of assimilation or integration where all identities disappear. So therefore, if the focus is on transnationalism as a context, as a concept to look at the responses of the communities of faith. And those communities of faith are two. On the one hand are the migrant communities of faith, but then also, between inverted commas, the non-migrants communities of faith. So those responses from both communities are important, as far as, in this case, maybe they are kind of grassroots theologies from below and so. So therefore, I just look at a number of perspectives and premises, but maybe also some possibilities that we actually will have to consider to look at how communities of faith respond on two levels in terms of the everyday practices, but also at a deeper level as far as their faith is concerned. I think those are the two levels at which we need to look at it. But that will depend on the discipline. And as far as I'm concerned, what I do, I would say generally, broadly, also for other colleagues, that I take the perspective of interfaith studies. In other words, any discipline that looks at the cross-border crossing of religions, but at the same time also look at their faith perspective in terms of what people believe, what they are committed to, and how that influence their values and response to issues of migrations and so. So that's briefly on the title. What I've just said now, it's summarized then in the introduction, and there are some of the key texts that I've just looked at for the purpose of this a reflection. And as you can see, the first one, transnational migration, appears there. And I said, it's something beyond assimilation or something beyond integration where identities actually are suppressed and so. So therefore, it's kind of a transdisciplinary definition of what approach we can adopt, or the perspective or the premises, and I look at some of them. The ideal study, at least from my perspective, is the one of Nagy, which looks at the Chinese migrants in Europe, Hungary and Romania, because it connects both the social dimension, or the practical, the pastoral, the pastoral psychological dimensions, but at the same time also look at the faith perspective. And so, you know, I was not able to look at examples of the South African studies, but my guess is most of them will pick up in some of the theological perspectives and therefore go directly to the social, practical, pastoral one, with the faith deeper one to some extent, to a lesser extent, and so. But the ideal one would be like the study of Nagy and so, looking at both the responses of the migrant communities of faith, but also the non-communities of faith. Because the non-communities of faith, like myself, at least as far as transnational migration are concerned, I'm an outsider. And my response is always a pragmatic one, and is influenced by other forces like the states and the policy. So therefore, I say it's very important then to look at some of the perspective and some of the premises. What is it that we ought to look at when you look at the responses of migrant communities and non-migrant communities of faith? And those are drawn from theoretical perspectives and so. And therefore, what I do then under section 2 is just a motivation why a transnational perspective is an important lens to look at the responses of both communities of faith and so. And as Levitt and other scholars, there's a lot of other scholarship around it, but I just want to go back to the original text, like 2003, and it states most of the lenses in terms of how the faith communities respond are often from generally the Western context, far less from African or Asian or Latin American context, and so. So that is why I link with them. Secondly, at least it's a practice-based approach to how communities of faith respond. But I said already, in that practice-based approach, it should somehow connect both the social, cross-cultural, the inter-cultural perspective, but also the faith perspective and so. So therefore, I identify with them. And I already said about my own perspective, interfaith perspective. I'm in missiology, theology of, like, if you want to, intercultural, but I take an interfaith perspective in a sense of also connecting with other disciplines in sociology or anthropology that also look at the faith perspective, but also the one of crossing boundaries and so. Okay, good. There are 8 premises. I can't go to all of them. I'll probably just look at some of them because the first 4 or 5 would be like general premises, but the others would also be in terms of an approach. How do we look at how churches respond to that also? And therefore, the first one is exactly what I've already said, you know, people's spirituality, people's religion and theology should somehow also be central. But then it also depends how we define what is spirituality, what is religion. In terms of our interfaith perspective, it's broad because we do not want to exclude people from different orientations, and therefore is to look at the religious dimension, the spiritual dimension, the secular or other humanistic perspective in their responses. So in other words, somebody can belong to a congregation and have a religious perspective, or other persons not belong to any institutional religion, but their spirituality is also important. But some other people come with a humanistic perspective. You would say, for example, you know what, I'm an African person. I don't believe in any religion, but I'm spiritual. Some will go so far and say, you know what? A cultural dimension is defining my response, not a religious one. But in those cases, people sometimes forget even the rituals that they practice when they respond to a migration. That is actually also a religious one, but some people can sometimes misconstrue that. Don't look at rituals as if they are also not a ritual response. So therefore, you would say a best way probably to look at how people respond to a migration, both the immigrants and the non-immigrants, is to look at their practices and their rituals. That would be an important premise and basic assumption. And so therefore, in people's responses, they are affected by state and the policy. Even here in South Africa, the moment the government says something about immigration and policies, especially closer to elections like now, 2024, people respond to that, even people of faith, but we should actually move beyond that. There's something more people are responding to, and even religious orientations or what they believe and so. So therefore, we cannot sometimes reduce people's responsiveness to immigration to statements about the government, etc. And so it's much more deeper than that. Therefore, another thing that actually also affect the responses of congregants, of local people, is actually the access to resources that people have, the unequal power relationships, and therefore the broader social issues, like, for example, of employment, of housing, it's about resources. Resources influence how people respond to what's happening in immigration. So that is a very important premises in terms of how we look at those responses and so. But, Levitt and others, and I'll maybe refer to others also, they actually opened this a little bit up. And the question then is not only how and why people respond a certain way, it's who's responding to what, under what conditions, and why. It's a more kind of a realistic lens that one put on in terms of people's responses, but also how we reflect theologically in terms of also, So concrete, nuanced, measurable lenses are needed to look at the responsiveness of local people around it. And so there, if you look at the third bullet, I'm just somehow opening up the question that I've just referred to now. 2 illustrations, maybe, or 3 if I have time. This is the text of Odogame. For example, we say, if you look at how African Christians, for example, respond to migration, we have to look at the realities of these 3 religions at least. And it means, for example, for some African communities, both the migrant and the non-migrant theological categories like fortune and blessing are important theological categories to which they actually pin down their own sense of feeling when they respond also, So in other words, we have to look into these different religions and so. So that would be where Odogame and others would say, they give a historical view of how the 3 religions have responded. But as I showed earlier, we have to ask the question, what response, for whom, under what condition, and how. As I said, I already referred to a good example that looks at the responses, and the responsiveness is the one of Nagy on immigrants, Chinese immigrants in Hungary and Romania. Even there, the categories of fortunate and blessing, as they draw from their religious sphere, is also part of that responsive and so. Okay, good. I won't go in this one, but this is the kind of work, and I believe this text, Aristophanes and others, also comes from a European context where they actually also take the approach in terms of condition under which do I take and so, and the work that they do also influence the premises that I look at here and so. So therefore, another premise here, I can't just see on top what it is now, but it's really how communities of faith responded in the New Testament times throughout the history of Christianity is actually radical different than how communities are actually responding now. So there's another premise that we have to look at and so. Okay, I'm going to skip some of this and just, therefore, people are really selective in their response. In other words, they draw from their traditions, but what they draw from their traditions depends on the resources and the power relationships, in terms of their own agency in their own responses also. So it's a selective transnational practice that goes beyond assimilation. So in other words, from what toolboxes, if you would like that in terms of tradition, from which do they draw, and what are the resources that shape what they pick or not pick in terms of their own agency and so. And therefore, myself as an outsider, as far as transnational migration is concerned, for example, other Africans in South Africa, I'm an outsider, and I would need to know from what resources do they draw from their context and their traditions, and how the less of access to resources in South Africa houses influence what they select is of importance. So in other words, the loyalty to time, space, and the connections are also the contextual conditions that can influence their responsiveness and so. Okay, good. Therefore, maybe the last bullet there, it is clear now that we have to look at people's experiences, people's stories, because they reflect the subjective part of what they believe, what they are committed to, and how they influence their responsiveness. And I said, the faith dimension of the interfaith responses becomes that very centered also. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, in South Africa, research, at least research on how faith communities respond, are actually combining both the subjective dimension, but also the objective dimension in terms of broad overviews and so. Okay, I will skip the next few premises. And as I move to the second part and finish within the next 10 minutes, is that fine, Len?
Yes, Kulele, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to check my time that I don't go also too fast and so. So therefore, as I said, we define interfaith studies as any study in any discipline that looks at the cross-cultural interaction and looks at the resources and the power relationships. That's that social dimension, that is fine. But also the faith dimension becomes very, very central, because it's actually then also linked to people's religious, spiritual, secular, or humanistic identity. So we use faith between inverted commas because we do not want to exclude any person that believes in some kind of superhuman power or a force, or even people who say, you know what influences my response as a Christian is not just what I believe, but also the constitution of South Africa, the democratic society. That also influences my response. For us, that is also, between inverted commas, a faith perspective, because this is what you believe in, and this is what you are committed to, and therefore we suggest that even religious communities, faith communities, should also include people with humanistic other orientations in their responses in addressing their answer. So that is the thing. As far as the diagram is concerned, on my right-hand side, you can see there, that is the approach generally in terms of what is it that we look not just in the general responses, but in the responsiveness of Christians in terms of their attitudes, in terms of behavior, in terms of their action. At stake here is their agency. It's their identity. and how they identify or do not identify with Africans who are migrants in South Africa also. So Asians' identification becomes an important category under transnationalism when we look at the responses of this different communities of faith and so on. You also see at the third bullet there, it's actually informed by a double hermeneutics. In other words, the Christians in South Africa, and it does happen, they always go back, sometimes also in terms of their own identities, in terms of the struggles that they have, and they try to address that. And that sometimes influence then how they respond to two levels. One, how they would respond to migrants, in African migrants specifically, in everyday context, but at the same time, how they would probably also draw from biblical resources, tradition also, This is what is the double hermeneutics. And I think we suggest the best response people have to first engage their own identities in how they identify or must identify with other Africans within South Africa. And that will actually help them to read their traditions and the text better, because we say we could not, for example, expect Paul or Peter or John to do the work for us as Christians. We have to do that work as we interact with other Africans, especially as we are non-migrants and we interact with migrants. So this is a hermeneutical lens. It becomes very important. And the center of it is people's spirituality, broadly understood there and so. So therefore, in short, a narrative approach to pick up the experiences and the stories and the content of how people or migrants from the global south are actually responding and so. And hopefully through that, we will generate a new theories or complementary themes that actually also complement the themes under transnationalism or a globalization context, as Negi and others do and so. This is now an example in my own discipline. And you can see this is a typical text of a theology of mission. But in it, you find what I already referred to, the kind of a double hermeneutics, where the local context become a point of departure for looking. In fact, the local context becomes the context from which churches respond, but also it gives us a lens when we reflect on their responses. This is an example of what it is. And the question actually is also a theological and a biblical question, because the question that we actually ask ourselves, why is it that some Christian communities or other faith communities can easily cross the boundaries and respond in different ways to other migrants? And other communities, they are neutral, they don't respond. And so the same question is actually being asked also as far as the biblical scholarship is concerned. And Bosch is actually drawing from that from some philosophers and others that address the question. Why is it that the early Christian communities, for some, was so easy to cross the theological boundaries, they cross the cultural boundaries, they cross the social class boundaries? Why is it like that? There is a theoretical, a theological, and a practical response to that. It is because the more they are self-understanding before the superhuman power or force, in this case, it was God and Christ, the more it changed, the more they respond intentionally. So the question from empirical side would be like, what is it in your tradition that make you to disengage on this? So there is a theological and a social theory, even in this text, unfortunately, but anyway, it was not the intention of the author that actually linked with a number of communities and so. So for the rest of the article, I'm just indicating what I've just described now. It is because of events. It's because of their Easter experience. It's because of how they identify or did not identify with the superhuman power and force. and therefore it actually actualizes them intentionally. They respond differently in terms of their practices, ecclesial church, but in terms of how they pray, in terms of how they witness, in terms of even their advocacy to some extent also. So just to say, when you look at the responses of faith communities, it's both a deep faith perspective or also a sociological and anthropological perspective. And this text that I just showed you now was actually opening up those perspectives. Although it was a theological text, you can actually read it in it also now. So, okay, good. I think I just want to say maybe the first bullet that it was a sociologically impossibility that the early Christian communities would actually embrace and include the outsiders, the stranger, the aliens, because the philosophers wrote that off. But it's because of the events in the community that influence their response. That's why I'm saying here is a theological theory which actually links exactly with theological, with sociological or other anthropological theories, which actually ask the question, how did they respond, under what condition, and why, and so. So in that text, or although it's a theological text, you can actually see that and so. I want to end in 2 minutes and so. In this presentation, my intention was not to go and look at what is actually happening out there in terms of research, at least at 2 levels, because I'm in the discipline of practical theology and missiology. What I've seen generally in South African research is that there is this diaconal, the pastoral dimension in terms of the activities. That one is there, but I've also seen how theological themes from the Bible and tradition are also included in there. What I'm proposing that we can actually look at that kind of research and push it a little bit further to bring out some of the perspective and some of the premises that I've linked, but at the same time also to see the possibilities that congregations and communities of faith can respond in a very transformative and a liberative way. And so, and therefore, thank you very much that I can be part of this transdisciplinary discussions and so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tlolile. Yes, and in a world where most societies are becoming more and more multi-faith societies, I think this is a challenge to all of us. And thank you also for reminding us it's not just what we do and how we do it, but why we do certain things as individuals and as churches and communities that we should also keep in mind, and the important place of identity and faith and spirituality in the reactions of people towards the insiders or outsiders, on which side you are. Colleagues, we've reached the end of our discussion. I'm so sorry we will not, unfortunately, not have any time for any questions, but just allow me to thank our 3 presenters all around the world. Thank you very much for your insight, sharing it for us. Thank you to Daniel and the colleagues in Buenos Aires for setting up this meeting again. And as always, thank you very much to Sylvia for your excellent translations. And we hope to continue these colloquia of us. If you have any ideas on possible themes that you would like us to reflect from our 3 different contexts, please contact the collaborators in your context, and we hope to see you around this table again in the future. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye, colleagues.